A few tips on drawing chandeliers before we start. Exactly how we draw them does depend a bit on how close we are to them, whether they're a focal point in the drawing or whether they're in the distance of a larger interior scene. But regardless, because usually they are very ornate, and because there are many elements close together, and because we always see them, as in this case, with various elements overlapping, to a degree they end up being a mass, a jumble even, of detail, some parts of which we can make out really clearly, such as these globes and some of the arms of some of the candles and globes, but other parts, such as in here, where it really becomes quite difficult to see exactly what the construction is. So drawing chandeliers in these sorts of places becomes a bit like drawing trees and trying to capture the leaves. We can't draw the detail exactly, so what we want to do with our line work is to draw the overall visual effect of how the chandelier looks in that part. But the other important thing is to actually spend a moment looking at the chandelier to work out exactly what parts are closest and to draw some parts as clearly as we can with a little more detail and a little more accuracy. And that then will attract the attention and create the effect that the whole drawing is drawn with that degree of accuracy. So in this chandelier, we've got this circular bracket here. We have another circular bracket here. And we have one here that we're looking at more straight on. And there's one behind this one, and there's one behind this one at a different angle. There's also the partner to this one that goes backwards on the far side of the chandelier. And what we want to do is to get the relationship between this point, this point, this point, this point, this point, and this point correct, because they create an ellipse. In the same way, the top points, this point, this point, this point, this point, this point, and the one here we can't see, also creates an ellipse, as do these, and numerous ellipses here. The relationship between the tops of the candles we want to create accurately in our drawing. So they're the key things to get correct. If we get these curves correct, then the brain will somehow see the bits that aren't there or aren't there in detail. Now I'm going to do this only in pen, I'm not going to use tone. So I will be wanting to put some of these shadows in as well, because they will help to define the overall shape of this chandelier, which is in Saint Trinité in Paris. So let's start. As always, I'm going to start drawing with a section of the structure that is easiest to draw and keep with a sense of right proportion. So I've decided that this left side bracket that's closest to us is the easiest shape on a subject full of rather complicated shapes. So I do a rather poor job of the globe there. That's probably the wonkiest globe that I draw, unfortunately. Notice I've done just a row of dashed lines because I'm still not really sure where everything's going to line up. It's a bit hard at the moment to judge that. So if I do a row of dotted lines, I can either ignore it later or shift it slightly. And if I end up with some dotted lines just between the lines that I actually want to have in the drawing, it won't be so obvious as if I've done a solid line and then I can't erase it. It takes me about, just probably a bit under 45 minutes to do in real time. You're watching this at 3 times my real drawing speed. So you can see more dotted lines, and I'm not trying to be too exact with all these swirls and flourishes and plant type acanthusy decorations and tendrils and things. But I do want to suggest the nature of them and the way they catch the shadows. So again, I'm often drawing negative space in that I'm drawing the shadows rather than the object that's casting the shadows. The other significant thing with this chandelier is the fact that a lot of it is actually picked out not in light, but by the shadow, particularly in the lower left part of the chandelier. So that will become quite important as I draw, to put that in pretty much as I'm drawing to give me a better overall sense of the shape and the form and the tonal values of the drawing. So now I'm starting with this next bracket, the one that we really see more edge on, I've decided to work from left to right. And so I position the globe, and I figure that will help in relation to the globe I've already drawn, and I figure that will help me to now position the rest of this bracket. What I particularly want to pay attention to is what the lowest point of this bracket lines up with the lowest point of the bracket I've already drawn, because this is to do with preserving that elliptical shape that the lowest point of the brackets create overall. And it really is hard to work out too much of the exactness anyway, but I do want to, as I said, give some indications of catching the light and the suggested detail that the shadows give. I'm also trying to get a sense of where the actual center of this light is going to be. I did do a dotted line early on, which was a bit premature. I'm realizing now that I'm probably going to be at least 1/2 centimeter to the left of that line. So I'm glad it is a dotted line and not a straight line. So there's quite a bit of what I'm doing at the moment that's not as precise as the second half of the drawing. But I think the truth is it's not really obvious if we're not comparing it to the reference. So now I'm positioning the right-hand side bracket, the one that's closest to us, and hopefully this will give me a sense of the total width and therefore the overall proportions of the chandelier in a way that will help guide me with the rest of it that I'm drawing. So here's another globe, and that one happened much more easily. Trying to put some details now against my dotted lines. It certainly gets easier with this sort of subject, I think, to create gestural lines that capture the overall pattern, the overall effect that we want more easily. I feel like these curly, leafy, tendrily plant shapes, arcs, happen much more easily now and with a much more natural shape and feel. Sometimes it's worth just spending 5 minutes before we start our drawing, roughing out some of these things just to work out what sort of marks am I going to be using to create these shapes or these effects, and to get some practice doing them and to learn to relax with them so that all of our lines in the drawing look the same. To do the brackets that sit further back. So these really will in a way be easier and more difficult. More difficult because it is a bit harder to work out what we're doing, but easier because there'll be less visual focusing on them when we look at the drawing. So they can be a little more gestural, a little more drawing the effect than the precision. The one thing we want to do with them though is to get a sense of these sweeping curves and curls in the ironwork. That'll be more important for how these look, how much they blend in or jar against what we've already drawn. So we want to get the sweep of the curves correct rather than exactly capture what we see between the parts that we've already drawn, if that makes sense. Sometimes we have to accept the fact that there are some imprecisions in how our details line up with each other according to the reference, and go with creating the overall sweep of the major shapes and not worry, as I said, if the details on those major shapes don't line up as they do in our reference. But again, I'm paying particular attention to where the lowest point in this curve, the curve of this bracket is, and the curve of the other two brackets that we also see in this lower section. Hoping that this will create the ellipse of the lowest point of all the arms of the chandelier. I'm also adding more of the shading, more of the line work to create the shadows on the chandelier, which are really quite black in the reference and do create, I think, a fair bit of the effect. There's a surprising amount of shadow on an object which has so much light on it. The fact that one of the globes is out does take some of the light off the upper left-hand side. So now working in this detail, there really are only 4 globes that are really clear to see. One of them is hidden mostly behind the left-hand bracket, and there's one that's completely hidden by the center of the chandelier. So it's becoming a little more relaxing, a little more fun at this stage for this lower section, as I've got a pattern for, well, not so much a pattern as a template for working out how I'm going to create the effects that I have to create. And I've established the overall shapes and proportions of the lower half of the chandelier. So therefore I have a lot to reference off when I'm drawing. And that makes it easier to be more accurate more quickly drawing the parts that I haven't yet put into place. I'm really not trying to copy things too exactly. So now I'm starting to think I need to establish where my major points are for this upper candelabra part. So there are actually a row of little faces circling the lower part of the candelabra section. So I do one, and now I was trying to work out where to put these candles. I related the top of the candle to the globe, but clearly my proportions aren't perfect here because I think the globe should be a bit higher, because really the candle needs to be higher, I think, for the overall proportions of the candelabra. But if I were doing it again, I would just put the base of the candles where I thought it suited the total shape. I wouldn't try and relate it to the top of the globe, but I had already committed to that. So now the important thing is get the relative positions of these candles to each other correct. And the other important thing to do at this point is to not lose track of which candles we're drawing and which candles we've already drawn. Now there's 2 very close ones together. And now I draw the candle that I've already drawn, and this pauses while I'm realizing I did that. However, I really don't think you can tell by the end of the drawing that there's an extra candle there. So again, we should learn to not fuss too much about our mistakes, not get caught up with them. So now I'm trying to work out the other extreme end of this candelabra section. So I put some marks to indicate where I think that might be. Again, because the edges, the lines that create the outlines are always more important. If some of these individual brackets aren't precise, that won't matter nearly as much as if the ones on the outsides are in the wrong place. They will really look odd in a way that no other brackets will. So a quick look to see, are there candles that are almost hidden by candles on the other side? Before I now start to look at this center section again, which I need to draw up. So working out exactly where is it going to be, since it's not going to be on the dotted line that I somewhat prematurely drew in place. I'm using a 0.3mm pen for this, which I think was a good choice. Sometimes I wish I'd gone heavier or lighter, but I think 0.3 for the scale and the type of line work that I'm doing for this, I think worked well. Again, I should have made this section just a little bit higher, but I'm not going to be showing anyone the reference as well as my drawing, so that won't matter. Well, no one except all of you people watching it on YouTube. And so now, some more shadow to do, some nice blackness. By making the blackness very black with a very definite edge, it does create the effect of very bright light on that part which we haven't put the shadow on. It also seems to indicate that the light source is close to the object because it creates a very definite line. So now we do, really I'm just looking to see, is there anything else that needs doing, or is this pretty much done? Have I done every little curl and dot and dash and spot and shadow and dark point? It's surprising what we can discover we've missed at this point. So it's a bit like after you've packed to leave a holiday house. It's always good to run around, look under the bed, because sometimes there is the odd thing that's been overlooked. So with the last of that, I think it's pretty well done. And look, if you've got to this stage, why not hit notifications so that you know when I upload a new YouTube video? And of course, if you haven't subscribed, please do. G'day, my name's Stephen Travers. I hope this has been fun. Chandeliers possibly aren't a normal subject, but they're often something that we might steer clear of. Look, it's no harder than a tree. It's the same principle. They're very detailed, so we draw the overall effect rather than trying to draw all of the detail, so that at a glance, it looks like what we want it to look. But look, whatever you're drawing and however you're drawing it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.